Hi everyone, my name is Shahid Khan and I'm a senior inspector engineer in the plant and engineering team. And today I will be presenting you with the design and plant registration requirement for a flying fox or the zip line. So before we start the presentation, I would like to do the acknowledgement of the country. As a department and as a person, I would like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are the traditional custodians of the land on which we deliver our services. We pay our respects to elders, leaders, past, present, and emerging. We'll just start with the overview of the legislation. So that is the WHS Act 2020. So WHS Act basically came into force in 2022 along with the regulations. So in the WHS Act, there's a particular section, section 42, which talks about the authorization of a plant. So which states that a person must not use a plant or a substance at a workplace if the regulation requires that plant or substance or it's designed to be authorized. So by authorization, it means the plant needs to be design registered with the regulatory body that in case is WorkSafe. So there are some key provisions regarding the design registration, and section 42 refers us to different sections of the regulations of 22, which we will talk about in the next slide. So in here, we will be talking about some duties of the person who conducts the business or undertaking. His most important duty is to ensure that whatever the work at his workplace is going on, and if there's a plant that is getting operated at his workplace, is without any hazards and is without any risk for the health and safety of the person. And as a PCBU, he has to ensure that the health and safety is being checked for everything. And as far as reasonably practicable, he is ensuring that the health and safety of the persons is being catered for. The most important thing about the duties, so duties are not transferable between two different persons. So in terms of the duties, the most important duties in particularly for the design registration purposes are for the designer, for the manufacturer, for the importer, for the supplier, and the installer of the plant. So as a designer of the plant, so his most important duty is he has to think about all the stages of life cycle of the plant, from the concept phase to the decommission phase. As he has to ensure that all the risks that are being catered from all the life stages of the plant, and he has basically passed on all the information regarding those risks to the next person, that is the manufacturer, and he has to ensure all the design calculations and everything regarding the particular plant has been passed on to the manufacturer as well. Then in terms of the manufacturer, so they have their own duties which are stipulated in the section 23 of the WHS Act. So they have to ensure that all the information that has been gathered from the designer with respect to the test and the calculations, they have been completed during that manufacturer process. And if there is some hazards or anything that has been they have identified during the manufacturing process, it goes back to the designer, and then they can basically mitigate that risk with respect to the engineering control or any other control that is required. Similar kind of duties are applicable to the importers who basically import any kind of plant into WA from outside, and they have to ensure that plant which comes into WA, it is without any risk, and it is without whatever the required information is with that plant is passed on to the information who is going to be who's going to be having the control of that plant. And the supplier of that plant is basically he has to ensure uh, that all the test and all the requirements which are being stipulated by the designer or the manufacturer have been completed, and they are being uh, passed on to the information from the supplier to the end user as well. So section 26 is the last section which talks about the installers. The installers are the ones who basically construct that plant, commission, and they are involved sometimes in the decommissioning of the plant. So they have to ensure that all the all the risk with that plant has been all the risk regarding that plant has been informed to them by the designer and the manufacturer. And if they identify any other particular risk during that installation phase, they have to ensure that that information has been passed on to the end user who's going to be using the plant and who's going to be having the control of the plant. So To just give an example of all the different duty holders, if a designer is designing a particular wire rope, in our instance for a flying fox, he comes with a breaking strength value in terms of the calculation. So he passes that information to the manufacturer, and manufacturer during the manufacturing phase goes to the testing procedure to ensure that that particular wire rope is meeting that criteria which is set by the designer. If for instance it is not meeting that criteria, then he has to put additional controls, or he has to go back to the designer to understand what is the extra controls that are going to be required there. And as an importer, a person PCBU has to ensure that if he is importing that particular wire rope from outside of the Australia, it meets that particular requirement which is set by the designer of the thickness and the breaking strength required. Similar case for suppliers, they have to ensure that all the particular requirements of that wire rope in terms of the breaking strength, in terms of the requirements that are for the thickness, and in terms of the core strength, and everything is being matching whatever the designer has suggested for that particular use of that wire rope. Similarly, installer has to ensure at that time when they are constructing that plant or when they are commissioning that plant, that the wire rope used is of that particular requirements which are set by the designer, and they meet all the criteria which has been suggested as well. So now we will just go in terms of the overview of the WHS regulations, and in specifically in terms of the design registration. So the WHS regulations 22 came into force in on 31st of March in 2022. So in previous regulations, there was a Reg 4.3 which used to talk about the classified plant or the plant which was a high hazard plant. So now all of them have been shifted in terms of the Schedule 5 Division 1 plant. So they are the ones which are the high hazard plant, and they are the ones basically which needs to be registered with a regulatory body, in that is the WorkSafe. So there is a particular requirement regarding the amusement devices in the regulations, which goes from the regulation 240 and it goes up till 263. And some of the regulations are I had mentioned as well. Once we go into the next few of the slides, I will mention about those regulations as well. So in terms of the design registrations, amusement devices requires design registrations. So what kind of amusement devices require design registration? So there is a particular requirement in the regulation which states the amusement devices which are classified by section 2.1 of AS3533.1 version 2009, they are the ones which are registrable. So all the devices which are follow that particular requirements of the dynamic product value and they come as a class 2 and above, they are registrable. However, in our regulations, there's a few exception of the items which are not registrable. So the first item that is not registrable is the class 1 devices. The second one is the playground devices. Third one is the water slides, where water facilitates the patrons to slide easily and predominantly under gravity along a static structure. Fourth one is the wave generators, where patrons do not come into the contact with the parts of the machinery used for generating waves. And fifth one is the inflatable devices. So inflatable devices, other than the inflatable devices which are continuously blown with a platform height of 3 meters or above. So bouncy castles are a perfect example for these inflatable devices because they are normally use two inflatable two blowers at the same time which are continuously blowing air into those ones, and they are normally the platform height of the arc or the platform height of the square shape whatever they have in that particular plant. It's if it is height is 3 meters or more, it is deemed as a registrable plant. And the same exception also applies to the plant registration items as well. So in terms of the amusement device, our legislation gives us the definition of an amusement device. So in the amusement device, it means a plant which is operated for hire or reward that provides entertainment, sightseeing, or amusement through movement of the equipment or part of the equipment, or when passengers or other users travel or move on around or along with the equipment. But it has a few exceptions list as well. So those exception lists, number one is the miniature train, and miniature train that is being uh, operated by a model railway society, club, or association, or a ride. Second exception is a ride or a device that is used as a form of transport, and that is being regulated by another act or of Commonwealth or another under different kind of act. Or Third one is the boat or a flotation device that is used by the person and there are no mechanical elements attached to that thing. The fourth one is the any plant that is specifically designed for professional stunts, theatrical or acrobatic purposes or activities. The fifth one is a device which is commonly available in all the shopping centers, is a device which is operated with a coin, and at so there's a particular condition in that one. If that device is not going to be having four children below 10 years of age, by not more than four children below 10 years of age, so that is exempted as well. So today our topic is going to be predominantly around the type of amusement devices, that is the flying fox. But there are a few other examples of the amusement devices that we look for. So like a flying fox, that is zip line, the giant swing, climbing walls, and bungee jumping. So for the flying fox, the simplest definition is basically gliding under the gravity. So basically you are at a point A and a point B, and the point A is higher than the point B, and you basically glide under the force of the gravity, and that is the zip line for you. And the giant swing is the one where basically you have a guided pendulum movements, and that guiding pendulum movements basically is constitutes a giant swing in there. And climbing wall is the one where you climb up the walls, but for the climbing walls it depends upon a certain conditions, and that condition will ascertain whether it is classified in that terms or not. For the bungee jumping, it is basically a simplest one where you jump from a high place with a bungee cord attached to it, and that acts as a passive brake before you hit the ground or something. And that is the core example for the bungee jumping. So in terms of the design registration process, the first and foremost important part is to understand the class calculations, as I discussed before. So class calculation is done as per AS 3533.1 version 2009, section 2.1. So basically it talks about a dynamic product value between the maximum velocity, maximum height, and the acceleration that is achieved by the person. So once you have that class calculations done by a competent person, and that competent person has identified that your class is 2 and above, then it needs the registration with the regulator. So in terms of that one, then you have to ensure that your designer is doing all the preparation of the documents, and all the documents, engineering drawings, all the particular requirements of particular requirement for that particular ride, like its operation manual, its 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 wire rope strength requirements, and everything has been met, and that has been submitted to the regulator. So once that has been submitted, so the submission obviously incorporates the form 200 that would be on the next slide. And once that form 200 has been filled up, it will be submitted whether like through an online portal, I apply. And once that has been submitted, then assessment of by the regulator is being done. And when our assessment is done, and if we need further information for that particular design, then we can ask for further information under regulation 2553. And once we have satisfied with the information that has been provided to us, we issue a registration certificate. So that's a basic overview of the design registration process that we have in place. So the next slide is just a form 200, and basically every one of you might have filled a form 200 at any stage of your plant life cycle. So this is available online. So you just need to search form 200 WorkSafe WA in Google, and this will come up. So obviously there's a paper-based application that needs to be submitted by scanning copy. Otherwise there's an I apply link, which basically you go in there and you submit every document that is required and pay the required fees. And that will be once you have applied it, so you are in the process of that thing, and then the application comes to us. So in the form 200, so there is a main two elements in there. One is the designer and one is the design verifier. So the designer has the duties as already discussed previously, as well as mentioned in the section 22. So the designer has to ensure particular requirements, so that he has to ensure that he thinks about all the life stages of that particular plant. So he has to think from the concept phase to the decommissioning phase, and he has to think about all the risk involved in the different stages of the life cycle, and he has to ensure that all the risk has been catered for, and he has to ensure that he has a process in place which ensures that the risk has been minimized, and he is passing all the design condition and information to the next person. So that is going to be the end user, or that's going to be a that's going to be like in terms of the importer or supplier, whoever is going to be there. So in the Form 200, the most important role for a designer is to ensure that he has followed the duties that are mentioned in the section 22, and then he has to specify the technical standard that is being used for the production of that plant. So he has to specify if that plant is going to be matching particular requirements of that particular standard, or an engineering principle can be used, or if an engineering principle is used, he has to supply that engineering principle documents as well. So second most important person in the Form 200 is the design verifier. So design verifier has some certain duties which are mentioned in the section 26A. So that is a new section under the new regulations. So that's the service provider section. So basically, if anybody provides an health and safety services to any one of the any one of those duties regarding the plant, he has to follow those duties which are mentioned in there, and he has to ensure that all the risks which have been mentioned before and which have been mentioned afterwards have been catered for. So the is design verifier has to follow the duties, and the most important part is he needs to be a competent person. So the competent person for the design verification needs to be the one who has training, qualification, and experience, and he knows about the plant, and he is eligible for the membership with Engineers Australia. And in terms of the regulations, so the regulation 253 is the most important regulation for a design verifier. So the design verifier has to ensure that the regulation 253 is being followed. So what is regulation 253? So regulation 253 basically stipulates that a design verification documented process needs to be demonstrated and presented to ensure the design verification has been performed accordingly. So whenever we have an application that is submitted to us, we always request for this regulation 253 document, and there's a particular information sheet as well that is available on our website. And once the presentation has been compiled up and has been sent to you guys, so there will be links and you can check for those information sheets. So design verifier has to showcase that how he conducted that design verification process, and he needs to be independent of the design production. That is quite important because he needs to verify that design as an independent person, and he needs to provide any inputs, or if he identifies any risk during the verification process, he needs to mitigate those risks, and he needs to that information to be passed on as well. So in terms of our design verification process, once that is being completed, so we just go into the basis of our application. So the basis of our application, normally with the plant and engineering team, we look into particular items and particular requirements. So we'll just go through few of those in a broader way, and obviously the designer and the design verifier, they can think about the other requirements as we go into that one. So the particular requirements regarding the compliance and engineering. So one of the broad topic is engineering and compliance. The other one is the risk assessment. So in terms of the engineering and compliance, there are certain aspects that we want to look into an app design application, and that a designer and design verifier should be touching base for. So first thing is engineering certification, that they should be ensuring that it meets the relevant standard criteria or the engineering principles that has been used. So if a base criteria has been set by one standard, so you have to meet those elements, but for some reason if you can't meet that elements of that standard, you have to meet an element of another standard, but that should be above and beyond the base standard. It can't be below the base standard. So for an example, for this one, I would like to give an example for an angle termination when you have trees involved. So AS2316.2.1 or EN15567. So again, the WorkSafe is not recommending any standards in particular. So these are the particular design standards which are used for the flying foxes. So I'm just giving you as an example for that one. So angle termination around the trees in these both standards has been mentioned as the if the angle of termination should be less than equal to 60, and but for some reason if the angle of termination is greater than 60, then there is sufficient measures are required to protect the termination from the side loading as well. And if for some particular reasons angle of termination is greater than 120, then forces in each leg of the wire rope needs to be considered to come up with the right strength of the rope. So basically, now we have different conditions of the angle of termination according to a particular standard. But for your instance, you are unable to meet these requirements. And so you can go above and beyond and to a different one, and you can showcase it to us that you have gone above this standard, not below the requirements of this standard. In terms of the particular requirements of a flying fox, the most important thing is obviously a height requirement and the weight requirement, because the weight requirement is going to constitute the most important element, that is the imposed load on the flying fox. So basically that is going to help you do the calculations and everything, come up with the right relevant data. And in terms of the other elements, so obviously the velocity is going to be playing an important part. So you have to ensure that the maximum speed that you can get for a particular wire rope, a particular flying fox, is being measured on the side and is being available in form of a data if it is required for. And in terms of the engineering drawing elements, one person has to ensure as a designer that all the elements of of that particular course are being mentioned. We take an example of a high rope course. On the high rope course, we have multiple elements. You have a flying fox, you have a platform ladder, you have an access ladder, and you have a parrot ladder, and then you have a cycle ladder as well. So you have to ensure that all the elements have their engineering drawings and assessments done, and they need to be submitted to us. But the element that is going to be registered to through the regulatory body is going to be that flying fox in that particular course. So for example, if there is a particular color of the course depending upon the difficulty level, so if that element has like 6 flying foxes and that has different platforms and different access ladder and the parrot ladders, so all the information for the engineering drawings needs to be submitted for those ones, and the registrable item for that particular one would be the flying foxes. So, and the most important part is the material selection for all the elements in that particular course. So the material selection needs to be ensuring that all the particular requirement for the engineering compliance have those particular requirements. If a standard says that a particular terminations of that wire rope needs to be having extra corrosion protection or something, because most of the flying foxes or the zip lines, they are operated in the outside environment, so it needs to have that corrosion protection available to all of them. And in terms of the risk assessment, a broader risk assessment needs to be completed for any flying fox application that has to be submitted for the design registration purposes. So the flying fox itself has a lot of risk involved in there. And with respect to the risk, so the core goal is to identify all the risk and assess them and come with a situation where all the mitigation strategies and the safety measures are involved. For example, if a risk assessment has identified that putting a hand on a trolley comes with a risk, so there should be a more control for that one, that how can you avoid getting avoid, maybe use a different kind of trolley, or maybe use a particular kind of trolley which does not need to be putting a hand on the top of the trolley for the braking purposes. So we have to ensure, you have to ensure basically, once you're submitting, these all things are captured in the risk assessment and all things are being catered for as well. So the next few requirements are again the broader perspective, but I will try to go through few checks and everything that we look for in an application. But again, every application is different from one another, and they are assessed based on the submissions that have been done. And sometimes extra documents are required to ensure that they meet the relevant data or criteria that has been set. So in terms of the structural design checks, so the most important part that we already touched base is the load calculations. So the load calculations for that particular instance needs to be done, and that needs to include all types of loads. So that needs to include imposed load, that needs to include the dead loads, and that needs to include the wind loading as well. As most of the flying foxes are outside, and there is a particular requirement for a wind speed to be there. If the wind speed gets more than the required one and that is not being catered into the calculations, that could be a very big issue in terms of the design fault in there. So these things, these elements need to be there. And in terms of the structure, again, the support structure is the most important part for there. In terms of the support structure, it depends what kind of support structure do you have. Do you have different towers, or do you have trees, or do you have poles? So in terms of all these particular the things that I have mentioned, so you have different requirements. If you have trees in there, so you need an arborist to be ensuring that tree can take a load of a platform landing when a person is going from point A to point B uh, during the during the zip line. And he needs to submit those certificates, reports, and a management plan as well in case of the trees. So he needs to showcase it to us that the tree, which particular tree that is being used for a flying fox, has been, first thing, it has been numbered, and it has been rated. He knows about the load calculations for that thing, and that tree is suitable for that thing. And if there is any particular requirements for that tree in terms of enforcement of anything, it can be mentioned in there. So once you have a platform on the top of a tree, obviously you need to ensure that it is being tied up with the ratchet straps and on the bottom of to protect the tree. So if that ratchet strap used for the protection of the tree, and the designer has given the values of a particular requirement of a 3-ton ratchet straps, or different values of that one, so that needs to be fulfilled to meet that criteria as well. And in terms of the breaking strength of the wire ropes or the cable selection, that is the most important part. So the breaking strength gives us the value where the rope is going to fail at a particular if the particular load is applied at the particular time. So that plays a very key role in terms of the flying fox, because the rope is connected between two parts, and there is particular terminations as well. So the terminations uh, play a second key role in there, because they are the ones who are going to be holding the rope, and they are the ones which should be checked for everything as well. So in terms of the termination, so there was a particular health safety bulletin that is being released by WA like us as well, and there's a particular requirement that has been set by the Queensland as well. So you can have a look at that example as a health safety bulletin regarding the termination, because there's a case history which is mentioned about the terminations in there. And if a standard has asked you to do a particular terminations with respect to particular requirements, it needs to be fulfilled as well in there. So in terms of the safety features that we have, so for a flying fox, obviously the most important part is to understand the safety features in there, because if is there any part that requires a redundancy in there. If the redundancy is there, it means if the part A fails, the part B is going to be basically acting as a redundant part, and it's going to be acting as a saving part for that particular zip line or particular part. And in terms of the braking systems consideration, like obviously which type of braking system do you have an active, do you have a passive? And in terms of the braking system requirement, do you have an emergency arrest device using a tire, or you are having a crash pad with a spring attachment, or you have a redirection of pulley act that is acting as your braking system? So every type of braking systems comes with its pros and cons. So you have to think about that thing once you're doing designing for that purpose, and once you're submitting your application, which is most suited for your particular flying fox. And the safety gear that is getting utilized in there, it must be compatible with the requirements that is being particularly set for that flying fox. If that particular safety gear is not compatible for the requirements of the flying fox that is being utilized from tree A to tree B, then there should be an other safety gear that should be available. So the next we go into the structural integrity. So the structural integrity is important, because in this one we have to show that the structural strength of an existing structure or a building, if it is getting utilized, or if a tree or a pole is getting utilized, it meets the criteria. And these all calculations have been taken into this thing, and they need to showcase it to us in terms of submission once a submission for a design application has been done. Support system shall have the stability and resistance as per the load calculation requirements. So in terms of the support system, so what is the requirement? If there is a requirement for a backup line, or there is a requirement for an anchor line which needs to be double wrap around the tree, or in terms of the safety or activity line, or if there is a requirement of a padding to the tree protection for the landing area, it needs to be fulfilled in there. And in this particular instance, if we go into the connections for that particular attachments for different kind of requirements, we take an example of a pole. So if a flying fox is attached to a pole, so it needs to match with the criteria, and it needs to showcase that if it does not matches the criteria, if it is going above and beyond that criteria. So if there is an eyelet in there, so eyelet should be coming along with a mylon or a bow shackle, and it should be a there should be a carabiner in there, and there should be a backup eyelet as well. And similarly for a tree, there should be a backup line as well, which should be wrapped around the in the main area, and it should be coming with a bow shackle as well. And the most other important part is the safety equipment. So safety equipment is basically the safety equipment that is going to be utilized for that particular flying fox or particular zip line. It matches the criteria or that is required. if if that particular zip line is for the kids, so that kids can fit into a particular type of harness only, so it needs to match that criteria. Obviously, having a harness, universal one harness, won't fulfill that criteria. If you are having a flying fox that is changing between adults and the kids, so you have to ensure that you have all the harnesses of particular sizes available and that they are fit for purpose as well. And obviously you have to ensure that once somebody is wearing a harness, there are checks and everything has been done. And in terms of the design documents, you have to submit the document which states which type of harness are you going to be using and what are the particular requirements of the harnesses which has been set by the designer. If he says that this type of harness can be used, and then you can use that particular type of harness. And similar for the helmets, obviously helmets has to be of a particular size, and you have to ensure that helmets are of that particular size of the requirement of a particular flying fox. If it is a kids one, obviously then it should be a kids helmet, and all the information regarding that kids helmet and everything and impact of that one, the that needs to be submitted with the application. And in terms of the trolleys, which is one of the elements that basically the flying fork works on. So which type of trolley are you going to be using? Are you going to be using Zaza hook trolley, or you're going to be using a different kind of trolley? You're going to be using a hatch trolley? It's up to you guys. But that trolley should be suited for that particular flying fox. And there should all the risk for that trolley, if there's a pinch point or there's any other thing, that should be catered for. And if there you are attaching a particular lanyard, or if you're attaching a particular requirement to go over there, that needs to be fulfilled as well for that particular flying fox. So the flying fox is basically so these are kind of the broader criteria that we go over. And obviously there could be other things as well that are involved, but that will vary from application to application. And once we have an application, if we think there is further requirements that we need to ask for, then we ask for those documents as per the regulations 2553. And once your design registration application has been submitted, and once it has been assessed by the regulator, and you have been issued a design registration certificate, so then comes the next step. So that is to apply a plant registration. So to apply a plant registration for a particular flying fox, so again the form 201 is available. If you type in Google, you would be able to see the form 201, and there's an I apply link for that one. So in the form 201 there is a particular requirement. So basically whoever is signing off on the form, so usually is the person with the management and control of the plant. He has to ensure one thing, that the plant has been inspected by a competent person as per the regulation 267. So the regulation 267 states the competent person is the person who has the technical knowledge, who has the expertise, and who is qualified for that particular plant. So once that has been completed, so you submit an application of form 200 to the regulator, and then once that number has been issued to you, so that is basically the number for the plant registration. But for some instance, if you want to go for an alteration of a design, so that is applicable only in case, let's say if you have trees or something, and arborists have given you that tree is not suitable to take the certain loads now, so you have to switch between the tree uh, A to B. And because that is considered as an alteration for that particular flying fox, if it is design registered, so another application of alteration of the design will need to be submitted. Once that application has been submitted and it has been approved as well, again by following the same process, so then you will need to apply for a plant registration again, and then you need to be ensuring that with the new tree it has been inspected by a competent persons. But in some scenarios, obviously the competent person's inspection and the annual inspections are the same. So we'll just go through annual inspections in a bit about the information regarding that one as well. So in terms of the inspection and maintenance, the first and foremost thing is the responsibility. So the person who has the management and control of the plant, he has the responsibility. So he has to ensure that his plant, in our terms now the flying fox, is being inspected on a regular basis by a competent person. So who is the competent person for the annual inspections? So the regulation 241 talks about a competent person. So the regulation 241 says who competent person is the one who meets two criteria. So first criteria is knowledge, training, qualification, and experience of that particular plant. And the second criteria is he is eligible for Engineering Australia membership. So that is the requirement of a competent person who does the annual inspection for an amusement device as per the regulation 241. And as per the regulation 240, the maintenance, inspection, and testing of an amusement device is being done on the following criteria. So it is either done according to the original equipment manufacturer if they have explicitly said in their operations manual, or if they're submitting documents that it needs to be inspected at this interval, then you have to follow that interval. Or if the designer has imposed a condition or designer has stated that it needs to be inspected at this time, it needs to be inspected at that criteria. Or the third one is designer and OEM, both of them are the same person and they are stating that this is the requirement of the inspections. Or if the above details are not available, then if operation manual which is being compiled by a competent person, that is the one, that is the criteria that will be followed up for that inspections. So in terms of the inspections, so all the recording, all the tests, all the inspections, all the maintenance of that particular plant, commissioning report, commissioning history, and if the plant is going through decommissioning, dismantling, or alterations, that needs to be recorded into a logbook. And logbook is a requirement as per the regulation 242. And 242 regulation basically takes us back to the regulation 237. Basically that has all the requirement of the recording for all the logbooks and everything of a particular plant, and record keeping of the plant is to be ensured that all the record of that plant is being kept with the plant for the whole life of the plant, that is with the person who is the management and the control of the plant. So I think like I have given you of a brief overview in terms of the design registration process that we follow, and in terms of the plant registration as well. And I briefly touched on the maintenance and inspection of the amusement devices. In our case today, that is a flying fox. Thank you for all listening. Thank you very much.